Hello, everyone. You're tuned into today's PIR live event. I'm your host for today, Brent Peltola. Our guest today is Dr. Deb Stacey from the University of Guelph. Dr. Stacey is joining us today to discuss her computer science research and her work using big data to study animal health and food safety. Welcome to PIR live event, Dr. Stacey.
Hello.
Before we get started, I'd also like to welcome today's viewers watching the live stream. It's great to have you with us today. Remember that you can tweet your questions to us using hashtag AskPIR throughout this live event. If there's room in your tweet, include the name of your school, your own name, or the city where you are so that we can give you a shout out. Look forward to getting to some questions in just a moment, but first, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stacey to tell us about her background and talk about big data, computer science, and how her work is affecting food safety in Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. As was in the advertisement about this session, I'm a computer scientist. So I study computer science and systems design engineering at both the Universities of Guelph and Waterloo. And I've done different research in computer science in the areas of machine intelligence, supercomputing and parallel computing, and knowledge engineering. And I've been fortunate through my career that I've worked with a lot of different people because computer scientists always work with other people. So we're lucky because we get to learn more than just computer science and systems design. We get to learn about these different areas that need to use computing. So because I'm at Guelph, there's a lot of people that work with animals, are concerned about food safety and the disease spread in animals. And I've been involved with a couple of different projects, starting with, I worked with the Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada to look at tracking potential disease in human beings. And that was by looking at the records of what people buy in pharmacies. To see if we might possibly have an attack of flu or something else because they're buying certain things over the counter. But through that, they introduced me to people that were interested more on the animal side of disease spread. So I met people at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they were veterinarians and epidemiologists. So epidemiologists look at population health and look at how disease spreads through populations. And they were working with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And so both of those agencies have locations in Guelph. So I worked with them, and we were working on a North American-wide project that was trying to look at, could you, in a computer, simulate how disease spreads from animal to animal and see if you could see what happens to cause an outbreak. And we worked with our American counterparts with the United States Department of Agriculture and a little bit later on Homeland Security, because a lot of the people from agriculture got moved over to Homeland Security because disease spread in animals is considered a biosecurity threat, because that would be a good way to disrupt a lot of things in society, because not just food, but trade. Because once you get animal disease, particularly in, like, let's say cows or cattle, a lot of countries will stop buying your cattle. They'll stop buying your meat because they think there's disease in it. So it's really important to a lot of different parts of our society and economy to understand what's going on with disease spread. So we worked together on a disease called foot and mouth disease, which attacks hoofed animals like cattle, cows, pigs, goats, those sorts of animals. And it's a very important disease because if you get that disease, we don't have very much of it in North America, but if you get it, it's very serious and it causes a lot of animals to be destroyed to stop the disease. And you don't want that. I mean, you don't want to have to destroy animals just because you're worried they might have the disease. And this happened a few years ago in the United Kingdom, where they got foot and mouth disease, and they ended up killing a lot of animals. And when they looked at it afterwards, they think they were wrong, that many of those animals were not infected. So there was a big need to have a better way to understand how disease moves through animals. And so we worked on that. And because this simulation involves so much computation, and it can get very big because you have many herds of animals, we actually had to put it on a supercomputer. And that's one of the reasons why they wanted to work with my team at the University of Guelph, because we'd been doing work on the supercomputing system that's in southwestern Ontario called SharkNet. So we adapted the simulator to work on a supercomputer, and it allows people from all over North America to put in scenarios. It's like a big video game in a way. So it's kind of nice because you can put in what you think might happen, and then like how it might set up. So how many herds there are, how they're connected, how many of them get diseased, and then we can watch it play out over 100, 200, 300 days. And then we can put in ways to stop it and see if it works. And this gives scientists, epidemiologists, veterinary specialists that work for the government a way to see if they're right about this, because they can set up the things that they know happen somewhere, run it, and see if that is the same. We've also adapted it for birds, so we can do avian influenza, which does happen quite a bit. Foot and mouth doesn't, but avian influenza happens a lot. They just had a big attack in the United States with turkeys. And a lot of the turkeys have been destroyed in the United States recently because they were infected. So with this, it's been very interesting to learn all about how disease spread works, about how important the agricultural community and the animal community is to all of us, even if we're not on farms. And it's been very interesting to see how the mathematics that's out there can really help to allow us to build these computer models so that scientists can work with that to try to figure out what they should advise governments and farmers to do when there's an outbreak.
Wow. So you're doing some really interesting stuff, and there are so many questions that are coming to mind that I want to ask you about. First of all, early on you mentioned why this work that you're doing is such a good fit at the University of Guelph. Maybe for some of our viewers who aren't that familiar with the University of Guelph, maybe you can explain why it's such a good fit for the University of Guelph.
Well, Guelph is a great fit because we have so many different disciplines that aren't at other universities. So we have the Ontario Agricultural College and the Ontario Veterinary College. So we don't have a medical school, but the veterinary college is like a medical school for animals. And with those specialists there, so we have people that at the veterinary school, they don't just look at animals, but because animals and humans now they live in close contact, diseases can move from animals to people and back again. And so we have specialists in that. They also look at human populations. And then we have a strong computer science, mathematics, and statistics departments. And we like working together. So we have lots of people from mathematics and statistics, computer science, engineering, physics and chemistry that work with biologists, veterinarians, epidemiologists, agricultural specialists, people who are concerned about animal welfare, about production animals, about wildlife, because one of the ways disease can spread is it doesn't just spread through agricultural animals, it can also spread through wild animal populations and then go to agricultural animals. So we have all those people working at the University of Guelph. And we have a lot of people that work in food science, so work at the the business end because they're looking at how what is raised on farms actually gets to people's tables. And so we have a lot of people that look at that and look at how this is influenced by the environment and how it impacts the environment. So we have a lot of people that work looking at climate change, looking at pollution and toxicology that's driven by various aspects of either industrial or agricultural production. So you have all these people in one place. So it's lots of universities have all of these different things, but Guelph has all of them together. And we're a medium-sized university, so we get to know each other very well. So, I know lots of people that are well outside of computer science, and it's very interesting to be able to get everybody in one place. So Guelph is really good for that sort of thing, and we're really proud of our ability to do almost everything that you need for food. In growing it, designing it, marketing it, monitoring it, modeling it, and worrying about the impact that all of that has on the planet and our economies.
So the other interesting connection for the University of Guelph and the work that you're doing, you mentioned SharkNet, and I know that SharkNet is part of the Orion network. Can you tell people a little bit about SharkNet and how that helps you do your work?
Yes, SharkNet started about 12 years ago when a group of universities in southwestern Ontario got together to put a grant together for the government, to ask the government for money to set up supercomputers. And there was a few universities, Guelph, McMaster, Western, Wilfrid Laurier, and Brock. And we got together and we decided to say, we don't want it in just one place. We want to put it at all the different places and work together. And we were lucky enough to get a grant from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. And we set that up. And then a few years later, we expanded the network and brought in all sorts of other universities, including the University of Waterloo. And now we have about, I think about 18 different institutions, universities, colleges, research institutions like the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, and the Robarts Institute at Western Ontario that does medical imaging. So we brought all of these people together, all the researchers, and we provide supercomputing, which exists in about 3 different locations now. We've made three or four big computers. They're connected to each other through Orion, like you mentioned, which is a big high-speed network. And so we have a dedicated network that connects the supercomputers. So we don't have email or Twitter or Facebook going through that or anything like that, or Google. We just have data transfers between the computers. And we can transfer that also to other computer networks in Ontario, supercomputer networks, like the one out of U of T called SciNet, and the one that's out of Queen's University called HPCVL. And so those 3 entities make to Compute Ontario. So all researchers in Ontario can freely use any of these supercomputers. And we're connected also to the other supercomputers in Canada through Compute Canada. And everybody can use whichever supercomputer is suited to their problem. And so researchers can work on these very high-speed, large computers, and we can get all of our collaborators. So if we have government collaborators or industrial ones or international collaborators can all work on this, and we have people that help everybody understand how to make use of these very fast, very large computers. So it really speeds up, our idea was to speed up time to science. And so we know people need to do their work as quickly as possible to get the results. And so that's what supercomputing helps with that. Far bigger computers than one person could have or manage. We have people dedicated to just watching the computers, because when you have thousands and thousands of computing nodes talking to each other, you have to have really really, really good people to manage the computers, to make sure they keep going. And there's always things that break down when you have thousands of pieces that make up a big machine. And so we have dedicated personnel that are at the top of the systems administration profession to keep our computers going.
Wow. So you talked about a lot of research organizations that are part of this, different universities in the province of Ontario. Are there government agencies then that get access to that data? And is there a way that through this modeling that you're working with those agencies?
Yes, we actually we work with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food, USDA, their Department of Agriculture, and any of their scientists that are working with professors that are in Canada and on Compute Canada. If they're working with us, they can get access to that computational time, the data, to run their experiments. So, and we also provide a way for them to bring their own data in and keep it private. Because one of the things that's really sensitive with when you're modeling what happens on farms is to keep a lot of that data secure and private, because it may be misunderstood about what's going on, especially when you're doing simulations. So you're simulating that there's an outbreak somewhere and it's spreading and it's going to all these places, and it's like, it's not really, it's in the computer. But we want to make sure that all of that is very secure so they can put the actual locations and the size of the farms. And that information is private information. And so we allow our collaborators from other countries to bring in that data and keep it secure. So we provide test data and data that's open. They can use that, but they can also bring in their private data, and we keep it secure for them when they bring it in. So we have people that come in, run their simulations, and then it can inform their own research work. We might have a researcher that's looking at vaccination policy. We might have people looking at how diseases stay for a long time or in a population, or we might have somebody looking at how the disease might go to come in from wildlife, or we could have somebody looking at a scenario where maybe it's a bioterrorism attack, and so there's lots of different locations where it starts, unlike a natural outbreak where it's usually only one or two farms where it starts. So all of those different things can be studied, and they can bring in their own science to figure out what's going on and their own data to that. And some of it can be shared, but some of it has to be secure and private.
So I'm going to slip over to the Twitter feed for a minute and ask a question submitted by Dr. Zephyr. How often does a major epidemic happen with animals?
It depends on the disease. What we started first studying was foot and mouth disease, and it's very rare in North America. And it's fairly rare in Western Europe. But in a lot of locations in Asia, Eastern Europe, it's endemic in the population because the farming is done differently. So if you look at Western Europe, the farms are very regulated, they're very small, they're very close together, and they have a lot of monitoring and a lot of regulations about how they transfer animals between farms. If you look at North America, we tend to have larger farms. They tend to be spread out a little bit more. The regulations aren't quite the same, but we tend to be very vigilant about making sure that any time foot and mouth disease occurs, that it's stamped out immediately. But when you have other locations, you may have small, in fact, they're not farms, they're people herding animals around. So the animals move around a lot, and there's not a lot of tracking done about where the animals are, who owns them. And so it's thought that a lot of those populations have the disease there, and it stays in the population. Because there's something special about foot and mouth disease. It doesn't kill the animals. It makes them unusable agriculturally, but it doesn't kill them. And so it's different from avian influenza, which will kill the birds. foot and mouth disease rarely kills the cattle or pigs that are infected. And so that's why they're so vigilant about keeping it out of the population, because it's very hard to manage once it gets in. And so we don't have very much of that. But with a lot of the bird diseases, we're seeing a lot of outbreaks recently, particularly avian influenza, because like human influenza, it rapidly mutates and evolves. And so it moves through the populations quite rapidly. And birds, it transmits quite rapidly through them, far more than it does something like FMD goes through cattle. So we don't have very many outbreaks, but when they happen, they're disastrous because of either avian influenza, it kills them so quickly and spreads so much, or foot and mouth disease, where there's a big government push to not have the disease at all in the population. But we don't have very many, and that makes it actually difficult for us to model it because we don't have very many examples. So every time there is an outbreak, we try to find out all the information we can.
So I guess that's the good news and the bad news, right? That
yes.
It's terrible when it happens, but it doesn't happen that often. So just a follow-up question from also submitted by Dr. Zephyr, and I know that this has been on the mind of a few people that I've spoken to over the last few days, and maybe there isn't a one answer to this, but what is big data? Like, so from your perspective, when you're thinking about big data, is there a way to define what that's all about?
Well, if you think about it for what we're working with, when you look at agricultural, like farms, processing plants, transportation networks, everything like that, there's a big need to monitor what goes on. And there's a lot more activity. I didn't know. I was raised in Toronto, so I had no idea about farms and how they worked until I got involved with this and found out that animals travel a lot. They travel far more than I thought they did. So animals, depending on how they're raised, may travel a lot in their lives. And so they move around, they encounter all sorts of other animals, and this is how disease gets transmitted and spread. And so there's a lot of data that can be collected about where animals are moving, who owns them, what their state of health is, when they're sold, what trucks do they go on, what processing plants do they go to, all of those things. There's a lot of data being generated all the time. And if you look at animals like poultry actually, there's millions upon millions of broiler chickens out there. You just have to go to a Swiss chalet. They have this big need for lots of chickens. But the thing is, chickens don't, in the grand scheme of things, don't live all that long. So there's a constant turnover of chickens. And so you have all this data being created over, like, every couple of months, it's turning over again to a new flock of chickens. So there's this constant production of data about all of these different animals. And so when you look at data right now, there's a movement in agriculture called precision agriculture that looks at how you take all this data, all this big data, and try to look at things that could tell you about disease. But it also can tell you about animal welfare. So you've got now big farms where you have either lots of cattle or you have lots of birds. And what they want to do is they want to get all these sensors in the buildings or on the animal itself. In the big animals like dairy or cattle, they may put it right on the animal or in the animal. Sort of like Fitbits and those sorts of things that people have to say what's going on with them. They do the same thing with cattle and dairy cows. With birds, there's too many of them and they're too small. What they do is that they put it in the buildings to see what the temperature is, ammonia levels, are the birds moving around naturally? So there's lots of studies now to look at if you put a camera in and look at how the birds are moving around, maybe an infrared camera, and you see how they're moving around. You can actually study to see, are the birds happy? Are they well? Are they being bird-like? Are they doing things that chickens do? And then you can, so on one side, obviously it's a business where people are producing animals for food, but there's also the animal welfare where you want to make sure that the animals are healthy and happy in their environment. And that's being done, and more can be done with big data, because you can now monitor them in a way that a farmer just walking through the building might not be able to. When farms were smaller and there were more people farming, farmers were very good at walking through a building and saying, there's something wrong with the birds. The birds aren't happy. The birds are doing something that means there's something wrong. Maybe they're sick. Now, they can't do that anymore. They still do it to a certain extent, but now we need to augment that by having sensors, cameras. Some people can tell by the sound, how when they're squawking, they can tell whether they're happy or not, whether they're well or not. And so you might have microphones listening to that, levels, the temperature, the humidity, the ammonia levels, all of that you then can feed to computers to look at and say, do we think the birds are happy or the animals are well? And that way, with precision agriculture, you have all this data. And then the real power is that you could do it from several or hundreds or thousands of farms. And so you can learn more and more by taking all this data together, doing something called aggregation, where you put it all together and then do analysis on it with statistics, data analytic techniques, machine intelligence techniques, to look at that, to learn things that you might not have known. Maybe like, why is one farmer more successful? Why are his or her chickens happier and fatter and more productive than somebody else's, even though they seem to be doing the same thing on the surface? So if you have all that data, and we're getting there, more and more farms are doing this, and there's more and more companies, particularly in Ontario and Quebec. Canada's producing a lot of small companies that are building sensors, building devices that they can put either on animals, in animals, or in the buildings that animals are in, to monitor what's going on. And so we're creating, in the next few years, we'll be creating a lot of data. So it's just like you put a Fitbit, like the Fitbit I have, you put that on all the animals, and you can tell how much they're walking around, if that's natural, if it's normal. That data is going to help us farm better and create a better environment for the animals.
So we have time for a couple more questions, and I'm going to go back to Twitter. Somebody, Spud007, wanted to know, what other experiments can you run on the computers? So are these supercomputers dedicated to your project, or are you running other experiments on those same supercomputers?
Oh, the supercomputers have lots of experiments. We have almost any science or social science experiment you could think of, we're running on those supercomputers. So we have astrophysicists that are modeling how galaxies form, how planets form. We have medical researchers that do synthetic biology to figure out what's going on with cells. We have other ones that that simulate what happens. There's some researchers at Guelph. They simulate what's happening on the surface of a cell to see how molecules go in and out of the membrane. And in doing that, you can figure out how to design drugs, because you may want to be able to have the drug go into the cell, but not have other things go in, and not have that molecule go into things that it shouldn't. So they can get images from various devices like NMR devices or spectrometers, all of those different electron microscopes. They take that and then they can simulate what's happening at the membrane and create basically movies that are at the atomic level. So you can actually see what's happening with the atoms and the molecules on the surface of a cell. So, but you need a lot of computation to be able to do that. So we have people doing that. We have people running studies on climate change, looking at big food networks, so to look at food safety. So we have people taking all sorts of studies where they get what's happening in various communities, try to go through all that data to see what's similar, what's different. So we have any science you can imagine. The computers are really huge. We have lots of strategies so that people can share the computing. So some people just need to run small little computations, but millions of them at the same time. Other people have very long programs that run for months to calculate something. And so we can handle all of that because we have different types of supercomputers, so that are better for some things than others. And so we make sure that people go on the computer that is best suited to their problems. So, we have a huge range. Anything you can think of is being run on those supercomputers, all the way from medicine and at the atomic level, all the way up to astrophysics.
Wow, interesting stuff. I never want to end one of these without asking our guests if they have advice for the students that are watching. So in this case, students who are interested in working with big data, computer science, food safety, any advice for those students who are maybe in grade 8, 9, up to 12 who are watching today?
I think the advice that I give is that make sure you take mathematics. Mathematics is the basis for everything, all types of research. You don't have to be a mathematician, but you have to have an appreciation for mathematics. You have to understand mathematics. So if you have a chance, take mathematics. If you're interested in sciences, besides just taking sciences, it's also good to branch out into other things. Take geography, take history, all of those different things. I've worked with historians, I've worked with economists. I'm working right now with someone who is a specialist in Victorian literature. I'm starting to work with a geographer. Everything's connected, and more than ever, everything's connected. So everything's connected to the data it's producing and all of the different aspects of looking at things. So the broader your education, the better. So don't just say, well, I'm going to be a scientist, so I'll just take scientists, or I like math, so just take math. Take everything you can, because you never know. I never would have thought that I'd work with poultry. I would have never thought that I'd be having discussions with an expert in Victorian literature. But that's the world we live in, that everything's interconnected, everything's breaking down, all these little silos that we put ourselves in to separate ourselves, to say, I'm a mathematician, I'm a computer scientist. That's breaking down. So I'd also say, and this is a bit because I'm a computer scientist, but I think people should learn how to program. Don't have to be an expert and do it for a living, but you'll find that it'll teach you how to think about things. It'll teach you how to think logically. It'll teach you how to think about big things, little things, how to organize that. And it's a skill that's really good, because if you've done an experiment and you've got some data back, you can write a little program and analyze it. Or you can use some software to draw a picture of it. So but the best thing would be, make sure you keep up your mathematics, because math is in everything. And it is a really good discipline to teach you how to think, teach you to be confident of your logic. If you can take some programming, that's good. Don't have to be an expert, but it's good to know a little bit about that, and just explore everything. Don't ever think you know exactly everything you're ever going to do in your life, because you don't. You know, if you get into the sciences or engineering or anything like that, you're going to work with everybody. And that's the same thing too, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I really want to be a historian. A few weeks ago, I met a digital historian, and he searches through records on the internet and looks at what people do on Twitter and Facebook and everything like that. And he says historian. And so he writes programs to analyze all this data, and a group of us are working on a big computation project. that's all about literature and what people write everywhere, whether it's in books that were written by Victorian people, whether it's books that are being written now, whether it's magazine articles, whether it's Twitter, like tweets, if it's something you're writing on a blog, all of that is being studied, and it's being studied with interdisciplinary teams. So the more you can experience, the better. It helps everything, and nothing is wasted. No subject is wasted.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Deb. Couldn't agree more. I think breadth of knowledge is always so important, and as you said, you're an example of that. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. So I'd like to thank all of our live stream viewers, and of course, thanks to Dr. Stacy for taking the time to answer our questions and to share her expertise with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really great. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. The next PIR live event will be Wednesday, October 21st at 11 a.m. when we will be discussing Canada's forests, sustainability, and ecology. So look forward to having everybody back then, and thank you. Bye for now.